Okay. Hello, everyone. So sorry. We have had major technical difficulties that have pushed us behind quite a lot. So we apologize, but this is what life is like in this reality nowadays when we are confined to our homes and we are fully 100% dependent on technology and how it works or doesn't want to work. So we really want to thank you all for just engaging, staying around and giving us a chance to make this happen. Thank you so much for all of a shout out to all the POV folks that are tuned in. Thank you so much. And you all know me. My name is Shirley Alvarado del Aguila. I am the manager for community engagement here at Peace Over Violence. And I am also the campaign director for Denim Day. And today we hope to be able to engage in dialogue with Hannah, my peer and colleague. And she's gonna briefly introduce herself to those that are tuning in on our YouTube channel, hopefully, as people are getting the word that this is happening.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Denyer. I work in the prevention division at Peace Over Violence. I am the prevention program and training manager. And so we do a lot of education like this. Well, actually not usually like this, but in person without technical difficulties. And yeah, we really believe that violence is preventable. So that's that from me.
Thank you so much, Hannah. So let's get started on this. I just got confirmation that we are live on YouTube. So hello. Thanks everyone for tuning in. And those of you that are just getting yet another email with the right links, we truly want to apologize to folks for these major technical difficulties, but we're just gonna get through this. I'm going to be sharing this amazing PowerPoint that we have here. And we're gonna get started. So let me see.
Press slideshow and then.
Right here. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Got it. Okay, so let's get started. So this is Denim Day 101, the virtual edition. I think as many of you know, Denim Day was founded, it was started by Patty Giggins, who is our executive director, CEO at Peace Over Violence. This agency has been around for almost 50 years now. It started in the early 70s, 1971 to be exact, by a group of feminist activists in the city of Los Angeles that just wanted to respond to a series of sexual assaults that have occurred, and they were not satisfied with the way on how law enforcement had handled a lot of the issues, and there was a lot of victim blaming back then that we're still dealing with now. So we have like very grassroots activist beginnings, and we continue to push forward that vision that was part of our very foundation. And 50 years later, here we are. You have me and Hannah kind of doing this virtual online forum for Denim Day. And we hope that you are able to get some information and some answer some questions that you may have. And Denim Day was started in 1999 officially, although there was already some activity as of 1998. And I think most of us are familiar with the history behind it, but it was inspired by a case of when a young woman was assaulted by her driving instructor back in Italy, and she reported the case, and that there was a conviction where the instructor actually was convicted, but then decided to appeal, and a high court in Italy sided with him on the basis that they said that there was consent, and that it wasn't rape, because at the time of the incident, the young woman was wearing very, very tight jeans. Therefore, in order for her to take them off, she had to physically help him. So that implied consent. And we know in the field and just beyond in communities that, well, that is actually not consent. So hopefully we're going to be learning some basics on sexual violence, consent, and other very important topics as we get through this presentation. Denim Day is coming up, is about 8 days away. It's next Wednesday, not tomorrow, but the Wednesday after tomorrow, Wednesday, April 29th. And we are really excited to have to count on your support, and can't wait to hear about all the amazing activations and how you're mobilizing your community in this virtual world that we're in right now. So now I'm gonna hand it over to Hannah so that she can tell us a little bit more about basics, I think basics on sexual violence, right?
Yes. So along, the Denim Day campaign is really a campaign based off of rejecting and combating a rape culture. So in order to do that, we believe that you really have to talk about these issues, understand these issues, the complexity of them, and be able to have a conversation around these issues. So, I can hit the next. Can you do the next slide? So first, it's really important that we understand what sexual violence is. So as you can see, we have an umbrella as a visualization to kind of represent what sexual violence is and the different kinds. So it's really an umbrella term for when a person is forced or coerced into participating in a sexual act to which they have not consented freely. And it can be recurring or a one-time incident. And so as you can see, like we have sexual abuse, that would be something like ongoing child sexual abuse, sexual abuse that happens in a relationship that happens repeatedly. And then sexual assault is a one-time incident. So that might be something like a stranger rape, or something that happens once. And then sexual harassment as well is an important aspect of sexual violence that we have to concentrate on. So it's gender-based violence. And so it's important that we understand that when we're talking about Denim Day, we're not just talking about rape and ending rape, we're talking about ending any types of sexual violence, any violence that's based off of power and control over women and any marginalized folks as well as men. So it's important that we understand that so that we can really start pushing back against these ideas. And then of course, we never like to just talk about what something is wrong with something. We like to give folks the tools of what is right. So here you have our consent diagram. And we know that consent at its most basic level is permission, but we also know that often this idea that consent is something confusing or something with a lot of gray areas is often used as an excuse to do violence against folks. So we really believe in teaching consent. And so, and I know, I'm sure we have tons of folks tuning in from different rape crisis centers with their own expertise on this. So I know this is kind of really rudimentary for you, but I also think it always bears repeating because consent is often something that we and folks find confusing. So we really find this visual really helps. As you can see below, there is the penal code, California Penal Code for consent. And we like to show that because we like to show folks that this is part of the law. So we aren't a bunch of crazy feminists coming in here and making up this stuff about consent. Consent is something that's actually defined in the law. And as you can see, a lot of what the law dictates is reflected in our diagram. So consent, of course, is yes means yes. We've really moved towards this understanding that it's affirmative, it's enthusiastic, and things of that nature. Sorry, phone call. It is something that's conscious and voluntary. It is based on choice and equal power. It is freely given permission, and it is active, not passive. And what that really means is it's something that's ongoing, right? So you cannot, if you give consent to kissing, that does not necessarily mean you're giving consent to any other behavior. So it's something that has to be ongoing and communicated throughout the sexual act. And then we have what consent is not. So it is, and this is also very based in California. So when a person is under the influence of drugs or alcohol, when they're under the age of 18, that's our age of consent in this state, under force or coercion. And again, that's really key. I think this notion of coercion, this term coercion, because oftentimes, you know, sexual violence doesn't look like the myth of sexual violence, which is someone being pinned down in a dark alley. Oftentimes it's something that is manipulated out of a person, right? To which they start to not understand what they're giving their consent to, or they start to feel like there's a fear or a threat. And so coercion is key. It's not under threat or blackmail. It's not when someone is asleep or unconscious. And it's not when someone's not capable of understanding what consent means, right? So we're talking about kids. Kids don't know what consent is. So, and this is often the excuse used in child sexual assault, like, well, they were into it, they came after me, teacher-student dynamic. And that's just not the case, right? Like if you don't understand what consent is, you cannot agree to consent. And then of course, silence does not equal consent.
Thank you.
Of course. And then,
so now,
do you want to go?
No, go.
So again, so when we're talking about sexual violence in our society, we exist in a rape culture, right? And so a rape culture is a culture that in which rape and sexual violence are normalized. It is a culture in which male aggression and sexual prowess is normalized, and women victimhood is just part of our lot. And so it's really kind of this huge complex that exists, and the message is sent to us through media images, right? So commercials, magazines, all of this stuff. It's through TV, it's through music, lyrics, advertising, legal jargon, laws, all of this stuff that kind of really reinforces this message that sexual violence is normalized. And so part of our campaign too, around Denim Day, is to really address this rape culture. And our hope is that one day, through raising awareness about these issues, through talking about sexual violence and destigmatizing it, we can exist in a rape-free culture. So again, do you want to, you look like you want to.
No. Oh, I was just gonna say that like the mission of Denim Day is to disrupt rape culture via like demystifying or getting rid of all of these erroneous misconceptions that we have around sexual violence in all its forms. So when we talk about myths, are pretty much like a vehicle on how like rape culture continues to be upheld in communities and societies and cultures in general. So that's why the myths versus realities make up like a very like strong set of educational materials that are part of what have made the campaign what it is today.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see we know that representation is key, right? Like we know that seeing ourselves in language, seeing ourselves in the representation of these types of violence allows us to really define our own experiences and help make sense of our own experiences. And right, this is part of the reason we have conversations with this language, and we really, even no matter what we do, no matter what your level of expertise is, we like to really break these sexual violence down into really simple and approachable terms so that we can really make sense of what this is like for folks.
So then Denim Day, what really aims to do is to inspire individuals to take action against rape culture, against sexual violence, but in solidarity with survivors, to stand up for creating, like Hannah was saying, a rape-free culture where individuals have access to safety and healthy environments, relationships, interactions, and just in existence, you know, just existing in safe and healthy ways. So one of our main focuses is like to make some of these actions accessible to people, because we know that when you talk about rape culture, when you talk about rape, when you talk about sexual violence, some of these topics can be quite scary or can be very intimidating, right? So I think like one of the aims that we have as an agency is to make this campaign as accessible as possible, so that even though we're talking about a very raw and serious issue, we are able to provide tools that make it less scary or more accessible for folks to engage with one another. Do you want to say a few things about that, Hannah?
Sure. I just think when it comes to any of this, and this is why I work in prevention, I think language is key, right? Like having the language to define your experience is really important. And so that's why we're out here having these conversations, reminding folks what consent is. Because maybe every time you return to this idea of consent, you notice something new in the definition of it, or you notice something in a conversation you were having with a friend or a family member. But yeah, I agree. That's exactly it.
Great. And like you have said, the language is key and is important. So one of the main messages that we have in the campaign has been and continues to be there is no excuse and never an invitation to rape, correct? And this is pretty much part of this whole effort on like getting rid of some of these misconceptions that we have, and it's directly addressing like the very origins of Denim Day, where a piece of clothing, the wearing of tight jeans became like a symbol. Just because I was wearing this, that meant that I was giving my consent, right? We have heard this on like with mini skirts or just any sort of clothing that mostly women wear, like are like just come up with carry like a meanings that are just imposed on us, when doesn't necessarily mean that that's where we are going, you know?
Right. And these excuses, right? There's so many different excuses, what someone's wearing as an excuse for doing violence to them, what they were drinking, where they were, right? Like if you go to a fraternity party, what were you thinking? That's like part of fraternity culture. So you almost like gave your consent to the violence that was done to you. And so again, like kind of expanding off of this one instance in which a girl and her jeans were blamed for the violence that was done to her, we now think it's really important, and to combat a rape culture, we have to like get at these myths, get at these stereotypes that are thrown onto a victim the second they vocalize their status as a survivor, right? Like they're automatically challenged and questioned. And instead of someone's automatic response being, I'm so sorry that happened to you, what can I do? Someone's response is, well, what did you do to deserve this, right? So again, and that's kind of what we are challenging in this and these excuses feed into a rape culture.
That's right. And just as you were talking about the whole definition of consent being like something that continues to evolve because it's part of a practice of how we engage with each other. The campaign also has to continue evolving in response to the new realities that we experience. So we a couple of years ago we expanded that that main tagline or that main messaging to include, because we know that when we talk about sexual violence, it's not just rape, but it starts with, or we could say like, there's no higher. I don't personally don't like to think of sexual violence in a hierarchy. But when you think about like pretty much when you talk about sexual harassment, for example, that is pretty much in most conversations that I have with folks, and mostly women or femme or folks that are not within the gender binary, that have experienced, they always express that they have experienced sexual harassment at some point or another in whatever circumstances. So what we aimed to do a couple of years ago was to kind of like show the array or the web of this thing called sexual violence in all its forms. So there's no excuse and never an invitation to harass, abuse, assault, rape. And for me, like the abuse is it speaks to the abuse, the assault, the rape, the harassment, all of these things like speak to how like sexual violence is interconnected with so many other issues that we're dealing, like harms that we're experiencing in society, in communities. So maybe Hannah, you have a couple of points to make regarding that, like the intersection of sexual violence.
Yeah, and before I say that, I just want to also point out, just like you were saying, like it's not a hierarchy, violence is not a hierarchy. Also, like part of the problem is in a rape culture, words and language that it's violent, or acts that aren't, like the culture determines which acts are actually ones we can have empathy with or pity, right? And I think it's important that we realize like a rape joke, right, which seems maybe to some folks as something harmless, is actually directly connected to the types of violence that are then perpetrated, right? Because it's all part of this complex of dehumanizing and othering and making someone like a victim of a joke or a type of violence. So I just want to point that out. But yeah, I think it's also really key. I really like that we've expanded this idea of Denim Day to not just be focusing on rape, because we know that all these different types of violence are connected. I think even now, really focusing on what sexual violence looks like for different folks, like the houseless and homeless community. We know there's a direct connection. We know lots of women end up on the street in the first place because of domestic violence or trauma based off of gender-based violence. We know that gang violence is directly related to sexual violence. We know that gun violence is directly related to domestic and social and sexual violence. So it's really important that we understand that in addressing sexual violence and saying we will not tolerate this anymore and there is no excuse, we're also saying there's no excuse for other types of violences that are done, right? There's no excuse for sexual violence perpetrated by the guards in a detention center, right? And there's no excuse for those detention centers in the first place. There's no excuse for the houseless crisis and how those folks are treated. So again, it's a kind of like expanding what we're focusing on and realizing that there's a lot of intersections and connections between the types of violence we aim to defeat.
That's right. And just want to give a shout out to everyone that's tuning in on our YouTube channel. We have like about a little under 40 people watching us. So thank you so much for tuning in. And there was a comment that Hannah said, not you, Hannah, a different Hannah. And even for non-women identifying folks are challenged right away. So I think she was referring to like how this impact, like not just women, but in the whole spectrum of like gender identity. When we talk about toxic masculinity, when we talk about rape culture, like I often think that there's a misconception that we're just talking about men, women, but that violence impacts us all, right?
Yeah. And I think like a patriarchy affects men as well. Like men are victims of that violence. And I think, yeah, anybody can be a victim of sexual violence. But what's key in understanding sexual violence is that it's all about folks who are vulnerable, right? So who is part of a vulnerable population is going to experience this violence at a higher rate, right? So we know women are a vulnerable population, but we also know that Native American women are a more vulnerable population than white women. So their rates of sexual violence are much higher. And so we know that these different types of violence are really about, and this is like the key, is that it's about power and domination and control. It's not about sexual desire and what someone was wearing. And it's easier to take advantage and dehumanize someone who's part of a marginalized identity, because we know that usually the systems of justice that we exist in, so like the criminal justice system, are going to prioritize certain lives over others, right? So like it's easier, that's kind of used as an opportunity to do violence onto the more marginalized populations in our society.
That is correct. So I think this takes us to the next section of this conversation that we have right now. So we're talking now about social movements, about movements that are seeking to end sexual violence. And I think that brings us to #MeToo. What do you have to say about this, Hannah?
Well, I think for us, Me Too can really show the power of social media and movements, and that movements may have changed mediums, but they still have such a huge impact, right? So the Me Too movement, while yes, there were protests on the street, it mostly occurred in this virtual space. And so it can really help inform us about what our own movement can look like in this new COVID pandemic shelter at home reality that we're facing. And so, yeah.
Great.
So yeah, now Shirley's going to talk a little bit more about like what we know. Denim Day is next week on Wednesday. So what is Denim Day going to look like for folks now?
So I think that a lot of people have been sort of asking themselves as to, okay, so we are all confined in our homes, which bring in yet another layer of complexities to this, right? Let's not forget that home, especially when dealing with domestic violence and sexual violence issues, home a lot of times is the space where you're experiencing abuse. So understanding that home is not safe for everyone, and going from that principle. And for those of us that have access to a safe home where we are free of abuse and free of mistreatment and free from violence in our own homes, how is it that we can take this time that we have where we are dealing with all of these ordinances that are keeping us in our homes? How do we utilize this space or this privilege that we hold in order to sort of think of ways on how we can stand in solidarity with survivors in this pandemic, because I feel like survivors have been and will continue to be a vulnerable population that we need to help uplift and bring up in all of these conversations that we're having. And with this, like you were just talking about, like survivors have been using technology to create and sustain like narratives that have pushed forward demands, bringing their testimonies forward, challenge and disrupt rape culture. So not only like movements like the hashtag Me Too, which is one of the most well-known, but like they were made possible by the digital labor, consciousness raising and testimonies created by mostly women. And when I say women, I mean all women identified folks, as well as our LGBTQ community and other like vulnerable populations. It was through their labor and through their direct actions in this virtual like platforms that movements have been able to flourish. So right now, as we are all mandated to stay at home, is how do we look at this new sorts of communities that are being built, like connections that we are having as an emerging capacity to utilize during this crisis, to help us connect with each other, to alleviate isolation, to share information, to coordinate efforts, express solidarity with each other and with those communities that are deeply being impacted by this, and bottom line, support each other. So something that we as an agency are trying and are committed is like figuring out how do we continue to build up our capacity to construct robust and strong virtual bonds. We know that Denim Day has been quite successful for the past 20 years in creating an easy to digest vehicle to effectively challenge and change like mainstream narratives about sexual violence and victimhood. So how do we take all of this action and all of these lessons that we've learned for the past 2 decades and make sense of them in this new virtual like sort of space, right? So with this said, I just wanted to point out that like I said at the beginning, like we are not strangers to digital campaigns and virtual activism. We know that social media platforms have grown tremendously over the past 8 to 10 years. And that we know that like 2017, for example, is now considered a watershed year when millions of women across the world said time's up, like, hashtag time's up to sexual violence, to pretty much like say that they're done, that we don't want to live under this patriarchal oppression no more. And we have seen other movements such as the hashtag why I didn't report or hashtag ni una menos that have like brought like thousands, if not millions of individuals like sharing testimony, sharing demands, sharing actions, standing in solidarity with each other. So activists, service providers, survivors have for a long time been using online platforms to mobilize our campaigns. And we, as a trauma-informed survivor-centered organization, we understand that social media does have it's an opportunity, but at the same time, we acknowledge that there are gaps, and that there is definitely the need to utilize online activism or online actions without leaving anyone behind. So making sure that all of our marginalized communities are still involved and part of it. And we know that technology involves like a class issue, because you have to have access to a computer, you have to have internet connection, you have to have a phone, a smartphone. And we know that even though we believe that most of us do have it, there are still people that don't have access to that. So understanding that there is not everyone is going to be included in this, but as long as we keep ourselves, we keep checking ourselves and making sure that getting creative is in ways on how can we engage as many people as possible. So I don't know, like how do we do this? Like a lot of people have been asking about how do we make sense of Denim Day in this in the time of COVID-19. And I feel like there is something very powerful about this notion that the story of this moment is being written by all of us. So this is where we have to kind of put together our minds, our creativity, and start imagining ways and how we can use the tools that we have in front of us in order to bring forward this movement. April is a very important month for us in the field, right? Because it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And we know that it's just like a symbolic way to kind of focus or ask folks to kind of pay attention to the issue of sexual violence. And Denim Day. Denim Day is a campaign that has served like many different communities, not only in California, but throughout the country and even out internationally, in order to bring up awareness and to educate community and to kind of dismantle a lot of these misconceptions. So how do we have this solidarity campaign when we are socially distant? I think like these are, we have some ideas, but these are not only the only ideas out there, but we have joined a call to center all the work that is being done in this concept of solidarity, right? And so knowing that if there was a time that we needed to support each other and help each other, that time is now. So for those of us that have sort of the ability, because you have not lost your job, you still have a steady source of income, and then you find yourself in a better position to give, I think financially supporting survivor center programs, survivor center organizations, or survivors directly is key to show your solidarity. There are several ways on how you can do this. You can connect with your local rape crisis center to see what sort of fundraising opportunities they have going on in their own locales. But then also there's been an amazing network of mutual aid funds that have been set up throughout the country. And some of them are specifically designed to support survivors directly. So I know that if you follow us on social media, we're going to start resharing and reposting as many of these as possible in order for you all to find out about these opportunities to financially support survivors. In our case, for Peace Over Violence, your monetary contribution to us allows us for us to continue to operate the longest running domestic and sexual violence hotline in the country. And providing our services that have been like critical to the well-being and safety of Los Angeles, the city that we are based out of. So and then also for Denim Day specifically, we have a shop, and we have some materials that you're able to support us by purchasing, such as stickers and t-shirts and all of these things. I know a lot of people love swag, so we are kind of attempting to deal with the need for folks to like show up your support with campaigns like ours by offering you some modest products for you to choose from. All the money that is made from online sales also come directly to support our healing services for survivors. Um, and then also I think like another way of showing solidarity in today's reality is like, again, connecting with your local sexual assault, sexual violence centers in your community, and asking them what sort of help they need. Sharing your skills. Are you a trained counselor advocate, or do you have any sort of skills that you might be able to offer? They may be up for having you come on board and volunteer, or provide any sort of support to them during this time. I'm sure that they would definitely um, um, appreciate that effort. Then there are other ideas that have come up. Um, there is a lot of attention, or a lot of interest in folks holding virtual online actions and to support survivors. So I know that as part of the month of April, there's several events that are held, such as Take Back the Night or the Clothesline Project. And I've seen some really, really creative takes, like virtual takes on these, where like there's a group of students from a college campus, I think on the East Coast, that are doing the Clothesline Project, and their theme is denim. So they're all like individually decorating their own denim, and then creating like the Instagram page, like making the Instagram page like with all their posts a Clothesline Project. So posting on each of the different individuals that have worked on the jeans, and decorating them with messages of solidarity in order just to bring awareness. And as far as the Take Back the Night, there's a few of them that are happening virtually, where they're inviting survivors to share their testimony and other community members in order to build solidarity with each other. Um, and then there's also the huge need of participating in advocacy. Um, I think as we face this crisis, we know that it's going to hit us financially, and it has already to some of us. There's folks that have we're dealing with huge rates of unemployment, but then also our public funding, we for sure are going to see cuts in budgets throughout the country. I know that we're expecting them here in California. So working in collaboration with your local organizations to see what sort of policy advocacy is happening at the local level, whether it's city, county, state, and supporting those efforts to making sure that whenever these cuts are being proposed, that services for survivors are not overlooked or undermined or pushed aside or defunded, because we know, because we're engaged in the service provision and emergency response, and just providing critical service to our communities, that we depend on these funds. So if monies are cut, then we are also left unable to continue to function. So this is part of how you can also engage in direct advocacy. And the best thing that you can do is connect with your local organization, wherever it is that you are. And if you don't know, a good way to find out who your local org is, for sexual violence is you can visit RAIN. Um, if I think if you click on centers.rain, which is RAINN.org, you type your zip code and it pulls up like your nearest local rape crisis centers, and you can just call them and connect with them and see like how is it that you can help support any sort of advocacy work that they are needing. And I think just also at maybe Hannah, you can help me out with this, because I think in violence prevention work, we always talk about education, educate. And I feel like even in this, if whether you're home with your family or you're engaging in Zoom parties, I know that people have gotten super creative as to how they're connecting with each other. So there's like game nights, there's virtual happy hours, and figuring out how is it that you can bring these conversations to those sort of like new ways of connecting with each other, or hangouts, you know? So just like as if you would have gone and grabbed lunch with a group of friends, now we're doing that virtually. So how are we having these conversations with each other so that we remain committed to educating ourselves and others on the issue? I want to hear about you, like how is it that now in this virtual world we can continue to be upstanders, we can continue to be leaders and peer educators?
Yeah, thanks. I think, this pandemic has us really kind of focusing in on some issues that maybe we haven't in the past, right? So there's this renewed attention to the houseless crisis in Los Angeles, as well as other cities and countries. There's a renewed attention to the class disparities, to poverty, and to how, like there was a report about how folks were living close to the edge before this all happened. So now that this happened and they don't have access to unemployment, what does that look like, right? Like undocumented folks, paying attention to that and how they don't qualify for the stimulus check. And it was just announced that even if you're just married to an immigrant, you don't qualify for the stimulus check. So, right, there's like a lot of conversation around these different issues that we of course are passionate about. I think what we look for in you all is not participating in the erasure of survivors from these conversations, right? So of course, we know that in a normal day and when life was kind of pre-pandemic, that survivors were often excluded from the conversation, excluded from priority. We know it was a huge issue. Now it's even worse. So what we can look for is really folks to advocate for survivors, to make sure that that's part of people's conversation, that we're thinking about the ways this must be impacting survivors. We know that in times of stress, intimate partner violence increases. So we don't even know fully the full picture of the effects of this pandemic and shelter at home is doing for folks and survivors. So really just like kind of thinking about that, sitting with that, bringing that to the conversation, bringing that up in your normal conversations about your check-ins with friends and family. I think also just realizing, like Shirley was saying, mutual aid is available. And now is a time to really understand our interconnectivity with folks, realizing that your neighbors who you may have just spent however many years you're in your apartment ignoring, they might be going through some stuff. So really kind of using this as an opportunity to build community, to connect with your neighbors, to connect with people in your area and see what you can provide for them, right? Because if what you're providing right now is maybe not services for survivors, food and just like connection is key. And again, like making sure folks know that they're not alone. And we also know that I'm sure technology is being controlled by abusers during this time. So we are definitely not going to have the same access to folks, but just really, even if it's shouting into the void, reminding folks that we are here for them, that they're services available, that our hotline is available, that folks are thinking about them, I think is key. And I think now is also a time of a lot of reflection when we're not experiencing trauma responses. Maybe we can have some time to really self-reflect. And now is a time to really get to know folks on a deeper level and have these conversations with your roommate, with your partner, with your family, who you're locked up with. So really using this as an opportunity to hold a discussion, to say like, this is an issue that matters to me. This is why it matters to me. What do you all think? Like, and gaining allies, right? Like maybe this is a conversation you feel like you don't usually have in the short time that you're visiting a parent for a coffee or dinner. Maybe now, of course, like based off of your safety level and your comfort level, like now is a time to have that conversation. And again, all of this, anytime we're having conversations around this issue, anytime we are educating folks, right? So you just had those consent slides. Anytime you're teaching that to a sibling, to a parent, to a partner, you're doing prevention work, right? Because that is what prevention is. It's just giving tools to folks, to community members. So I think now is really a time to share that information that you have. Maybe you're attending a lot of webinars and learning more information about these issues. So now is a time to have these conversations, I think. So I think that's one of the main ways we as preventionists are doing that. We're really having more conversations with each other, as well, like planning and how can we support youth who are, because of course we have to think about youth in these times as well, and how lockdown is affecting them in terms of sexual and intimate partner violence. And so what are ways that we can connect, and what are ways we can still have these conversations in a semi-safe manner?
Definitely. I think that brings us to this last piece of today's programming. I think we wanted to end with this topic of solidarity that I hope that we have been sort of bringing forward, you know, and again, like there's various ways to express solidarity. Hannah just went through like a whole series of ways on how to stand in solidarity with survivors and honestly each other. There's one thing that I think Naomi Klein has said that has really spoken to me, is that the future will be determined by those who are determined to fight harder. So this is not a time to lose sight of ourselves, and as dark as it may look for you, for those of us that perhaps have a little bit more of an ability to cope and to handle, to know that we got you, that we got your back, and that we're going to fight hard for you. So we are calling upon the cooperative, the compassionate, the collaborative, the empathetic, altruistic, open-minded part of us, for our humanity and kinship to really manifest during this unprecedented time, where, like we were talking in the team, is like wearing jeans that has been sort of like the foundation of this campaign. That's almost taking like second place as we are getting ready to observe Denim Day next week. We don't care what you wear at this point. If you want to show your denim, 100%. But if you're someone like me, I can't remember the last time that I wore something that didn't have an elastic waist, because it's just, I'm home, I'm comfortable, right? But my actions, how we have a remarkable responsibility to really work together in this time of physical distancing, and as we're facing a pretty critical and urgent crisis. So as ordinances continue to be in place to help us fight this virus, we also need to remain committed to standing in solidarity so that we can continue to fight against these other harms that are present in our communities and in our society. So use technology at your best ability if you have it. If you're tuning, I'm assuming that you do, in order to go into this virtual world that allows us to just connect, and that we can interact with each other and really look into having like strong community ties. You can do meetings, you can do gatherings, you can hold a video conferencing, and raise up these issues, like, and let us know what is it that you're doing in this next 8 days. And we know that one way or the other, we're going to get through this. We are not going to go back to normal because the normal was not working, but we are seeking to really reclaiming our right to life, to justice, to a violence-free future. And we got this. And so let's show love to each other and let's stand in solidarity. There are any questions that have that come up, you're more than welcome to reach out to us via our various platforms, social media, or email. And I don't know if you have any closing thoughts, Hannah.
No, I agree. I think, we don't want to go back to whatever normal. I don't think there ever was a normal, but we don't want to go back to the way things were before. So yeah, let's use this opportunity to really envision a future that is trauma informed, a future that is one where we hold each other up. And I think just realizing that rape, sexual violence is an epidemic. We don't actually know how many people are affected. There are the statistics, but we know the rates are higher. So being aware that anytime you talk about these issues, you're impacting someone, be they a survivor or not, you're impacting them. So you're showing solidarity, you're showing advocacy. So yeah, just really working towards use this opportunity. I know, look, I have brain fog every day. But when I have a moment of clarity, like really trying to envision what I want this future to look like, and the future. And I think the only option we really have is solidarity.
Yeah. So solidarity all day long. And then just want to bring up that we have some really cool things available for downloads that you can use on your online activations as you're going out in your community. So we have like anywhere from like Zoom backgrounds so that you can have like your Zoom party, then day theme, or like your work meetings or whatever it is that you're doing online. Like you can use some of those. We have also action signs, and we actually have a really cool collaboration part of this effort to just bring like new things to the campaign. We collaborated with a Peruvian artist. Her name is Lucia Cos, and she created this wonderful illustration of like, we asked her like, what does solidarity look like to you, and this is what she came up with, and it's using the well-known Las Tesis chant that became sort of viral and went global, that it was the rapist in your path, I think is the name of it in English. But you can download this as well as many other ones in our online shop. So if you go to denimdayinfo.org, you can find the action kit, you can find the downloadables, you can find like a series of different information. And if you don't find it, you can always email us, hit us up, let us know what you're doing. Make sure that you're tagging us on our social media platforms. And thank you so much for joining in. Thank you, Hannah, for being here today. And we were troopers. We had major technological difficulties, but we did it.
Yeah,
and
it was rough for a minute there.
But thank you so much, everyone. Have a safe and I hope rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.